moving away from being just a payment token towards becoming an institutional DeFi hub. Most people still associate XRP with cross-border payments, but in March 2026, the narrative changes completely. Native lending directly on the XRP Ledger. Zero knowledge, privacy, and institutional DeFi infrastructure. Over $1 billion in ETF inflow since November 2025, but hardly anyone is talking about it. Is XRP the quiet DeFi winner of 2026, or will the market once again react too late? Let's take a look at the data together. Hi, I'm Marius from 10x Invest. Today we'll be analyzing XRP Ripple and the DeFi revolution of 2026 together. We'll be talking about the protocol leveling landing with XLS66 and zero knowledge privacy, as well as the extremely exciting Flare integration. And at the end, I'll also show you why institutional capital is currently rotating structurally and whether XRP can really explode in 2026. So make sure to stay tuned until the end because I'll also do a chart analysis and take a look at what's happening right now. The new XRPL roadmap for 2026. Ripple is shifting its focus away from pure payments toward, ultimately, institutional DeFi. With XLS66, lending comes directly to the protocol level. Not as a smart contract layer, but natively integrated. And this way, institutions can ultimately source liquidity, structure loans, and generate yield. And compliance remains central in this process. In other words, zero-knowledge proofs will launch in Q1 of 2026, as will confidential multipurpose tokens. What does that mean? Private, regulatorily compliant transactions. So, perfect for the RLUSD stablecoin. Additionally, selling credentials for KYC and DIDs are being introduced, as well as deprecations for functions related to sanctions control, but also simulated features for risk analysis. This is not a typical DeFi experiment. Rather, this is institutional infrastructure. And this is exactly where the difference lies. Flare integration and XRPFI. Now it gets practical. Integration with the Flare network via the XRman wallet. By the way, I have already analyzed Flare myself. I'll link it for you up here. In any case, they are doing this via the XRman wallet. One-click DeFi wallets, also extremely exciting. So you hold XRP on the XRPL, cross-chain to Flare, and generate yields without the classic bridge complexity. Around 2 billion XRP can thus be activated through DeFi. This massively expands the ecosystem. XRP thus transforms from a settlement asset into productive capital. This is structurally extremely relevant, and not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. And now comes the crucial point in all of this: institutional inflows. Since November 2025, over $1 has flowed into XRP ETFs. And this isn't retail momentum, but rather structural capital. Because when infrastructure and capital grow simultaneously, then a new market cycle emerges. But now let's take a look at the chart. Where is XRP right now? When would I get in? What price targets do I see for this year? Let's look at the XRP chart together. I use TradingView. I think many of you are familiar with it. And I use the Zenix indicator, which is data-based for my chart analyses without ultimately relying on anything else. Not reacting to emotions, FOMO or FOD, but really purely data-driven. Let's first take a general look at XRP. As you can see here, there was already a massive increase, especially if you take a look at this. We had here that was almost again 650% in that upswing. The top was here on the 19th, July 2025. By the way, my indicator basically called the top. It showed with a big red dot that we were overbought and that you should be careful now. Here too, it called the top perfectly, and here as well. So in that regard, it worked well. Then we dropped massively. If we take a look at this together now, that's 69%, so extremely. Right now we're at about minus 61%. What's interesting now is what my indicator showed. It showed here once a big green dot, so an exciting entry opportunity, for example for DCA, but also here. Again, both here as well. Low points, at least local ones. And now recently again here, ultimately the bottom. So once again, an interesting entry for a DCA. But then we went back up again. So in other words, here a green dot. And then we went up. Let's take a look. If you take the big green dot now, that was roughly here, then we would have almost 46 points here already. Made percent at the top, and here still at least 23%. But what does the current situation look like? We have formed a small green dot. That basically means we have a bullish trend reversal. That actually got confirmed because here a small green dot was formed. That was roughly here, and after that we went up by another 7%. So overall, things are looking positive in the short term for now because we have a bullish trend reversal. But let's also take another look at the long term. If we go to the weekly chart, that's even more meaningful because on a longer time frame, we have formed a small green dot here. On the weekly, you have to imagine that was also very close to the oversold zone. A large dot would have formed there. By the way, that's always the point where I enter on the one-day chart. That only happens rarely, as you can see here. That's where the big green dot was formed. What happened after that? That was here, that was the bottom again. After that, we went up by 11 times, 11,000%, so extremely high. And at the moment, from a long-term perspective, things are looking positive for now. On the daily chart, as I said, we've moved upwards. Here I would be a bit more cautious because we're now in the middle range, so it could still go further up. And then, at some point, we'll probably see an overbought zone here, where many people are buying. We'll get into this hype, and then it will go down again. And what does it look like on the 4-hour chart? That's more intended for trading, I'd say for short-term trading. There too, we have a small green dot, which generally speaks in favor for now. On the 4-hour chart, daily chart and weekly chart, everything looks quite positive. But still, I would be cautious about entering right now because we're exactly in the middle range here. Personally, I don't rely on the price here or on any, let's say, articles in the social media space that make a lot of noise and hype. Instead, I approach the whole thing data-driven and without emotions. And that's why I always enter, that's my personal tactic, on the daily chart. When a big green dot forms at the bottom, like here, as you can see, that would be a good entry point. That's why I personally would wait right now. With XRP, if we go down here and form a big green dot, then that would definitely be an exciting entry zone for me. If you want to use the indicator for your own analyses now, I'll link it for you below, in the video description or here on the QR code. On the one hand, it's included in my 10x Elite, where I really share my entire investment program with you. Or you can also get the indicator separately. And you also get a discount at the moment with the code START. You'll get 30% off the first month. So this might be extremely interesting for you to maybe test the indicator yourself. As I said, all the information is below. And now I'll give a conclusion for the overall video and for XRP. Can the explosion really happen? Why could XRP explode in 2026? There are 3 factors. First, protocol level lending. That's what sets XRP apart from many other chains. Second, privacy and compliance. For example, ZK proofs, confidential tokens, institutionally compatible, which is important. And third, interoperability via Flare, a yield without complexity. If you really combine that with ETF capital, then ultimately a DeFi hub is created because it doesn't fight against governments, but integrates them. And that is strategically extremely strong. But explosion doesn't mean a linear increase, it also means volatility and momentum phases. And that's why a clear strategy is needed. In 2026, XRP is not just a payment token. The XRPL will become an institutional DeFi structure, infrastructure with lending, privacy, and with stablecoin integration, especially with ETF capital. That is a fundamental shift, but whether the price explodes ultimately depends on adoption and volume. But the foundation is being laid right now, and it's exactly these kinds of phases that are extremely important to recognize. If you want to get in early, if you now want to see my complete analysis of XRP, then I highly recommend this video to you. There, I have analyzed everything in detail. Enjoy, thanks for watching, and see you soon.